Bonjour tout le monde. It is a real pleasure to welcome President von der Leyen to Canada. Ursula, thank you so much for being here. No matter where we are, NATO meetings, Canada-EU summit, Brussels, G7 leaderships, I've always been able to count on your insights, your friendship, and your steadfast values. Just ahead of International Women's Day tomorrow, I'm struck by the fact that we're here not only with the President of the European Union, but also with our Deputy Prime Minister, our Minister of Defence, and our Minister of Foreign Affairs, who all happen to be strong women leaders. That is always a pleasure to see. Every day, their expertise and dedication makes the future brighter for people on both sides of the Atlantic. Les liens qui unissent le Canada et l'Europe sont étroits et notre solidarité continue de se resserrer. Aujourd'hui, on renforce encore davantage notre partenariat et on commence par le soutien qu'on offre ensemble à l'Ukraine. We're here at Canadian Forces Base Kingston to meet and thank the women and men supporting operations in Europe. This includes personnel involved in training Ukrainian security forces, Canadians in uniform who've been deployed in Poland to support Ukrainian refugees, and in Latvia to support NATO. There can be no doubt, just as the resolve of our brave women and men in uniform is unwavering, so too is the bond between Canada and Europe. Already, Canada has provided military support to Ukraine and put in place sanctions and punitive economic measures against the Russian regime. Together, President von der Leyen and I also co-hosted an international pledging event for Ukrainians who've been forced from their homes, many of whom have become refugees. For as long as it takes, we will stand shoulder to shoulder together with our European partners for Ukraine. Today, I can announce that we are extending our engineering training as part of Operation Unifier until at least the fall, and deploying CAF medical trainers to help Ukrainian forces with combat medical skills. We're also investing $3 million for demining in Ukraine and working with the EU to deliver energy equipment to Ukraine for their power grid. Je suis heureux de vous annoncer qu'on prolonge la formation de sapeurs de combat dans le cadre de l'opération unifiée jusqu'en octobre 2023 au moins. On va également déployer des formateurs médicaux des forces armées canadiennes pour aider les forces ukrainiennes à acquérir des compétences en médecine de combat. De plus, l'Union européenne a accordé au Canada le statut de pays partenaire dans le cadre de son régime de contrôle des exportations et de sanctions contre la Russie. Ça va nous aider à renforcer notre coopération en matière d'application des sanctions. Comme je l'ai dit à la présidente von der Leyen, le Canada va rester solidaire de la population de l'Ukraine aussi longtemps qu'il le faudra. Today, the President and I also talked about another shared priority, growing strong and resilient economies and creating jobs on both sides of the Atlantic. For over 6 years now, CETA has helped our businesses work together to create growth and opportunities. Later this afternoon, we'll be visiting a Canadian company that recycles lithium-ion batteries for clean tech like electric vehicles. Lysical is not only creating jobs and building up our critical mineral supply in Canada, they're opening plants in Europe too, so they can do the same there. Whether it's ways that Canada is leading, or ways the EU is leading, or ways in which we're leading together, this partnership means good jobs for our workers and resources that the world needs. So today, we're strengthening this partnership even further. Pendant la visite du chancelier Scholz l'été dernier, on a pris l'engagement de procéder aux premières exportations d'hydrogène vers l'Allemagne d'ici 2025. Aujourd'hui, on annonce le passage à une nouvelle étape avec un plan d'action amélioré sur l'hydrogène entre le Canada et l'Union européenne. The new Canada-EU Enhanced Action Plan on Hydrogen will mobilize investment, support businesses, share expertise, and get clean Canadian hydrogen to Europe. Fundamentally, it's about good middle-class jobs, economic growth, and clean energy. This is on top of work together on protecting nature and fighting climate change to deliver a strong future for our kids and grandkids. There is so much that Canada and Europe share: a commitment to the people of Ukraine, to defending democracy and international law, and to protecting human rights. Shared values like gender equality, and a commitment to growing the middle class and making sure people have good careers they can be proud of and build their families and communities around. And a belief that we can and will build a strong, healthy future for generations to come. Le Canada et l'Europe sont des amis, des alliés et des partenaires commerciaux. En renforçant nos liens, on bâtit un avenir plus fort et plus prometteur pour tous nos citoyens. Ursula, encore une fois, c'est un grand plaisir de t'avoir ici avec nous aujourd'hui. À vous la parole.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, dear Justin. I've been very much looking forward to this visit. Indeed, Canada is one of the European Union's most trusted partners. We share the same vision of the world, the same democratic values. We believe in the power of cooperation, solidarity, and multilateralism. We are not only partners, we are true friends. And it is as close friends that we worked together through this last year, that we coordinated our support, for example, to the brave people of Ukraine, united in a common purpose. I know the deep and historical ties that you, Canada, have with our neighbor, Ukraine. I was deeply impressed when in April last year, many Canadian men and women went from here in Kingston, from Edmonton or from other Canadian bases all the way to Poland. They went to Europe to help the Ukrainian people who had to flee Russia's bomb. I'm also deeply impressed by the hospitality you immediately gave to Ukrainian refugees here in Canada, thousands of them. Just as we did in the European Union, we welcomed, sheltered and protected 4 million refugees from Ukraine. We have also strongly aligned our successive packages of sanctions against Russia together with our G7 partners. Sanctions are biting deep and hard, from going after Putin's cronies and propagandists to draining the resources he needs to wage his war. For example, the very successful oil price caps that we have agreed on together. We will keep supporting Ukraine in these dark times until Ukraine prevails. We're both stepping up our support to Ukraine, including our military support, because Ukrainians have all the necessary grit and spirit, but what they need is weapons. The European Union has already delivered 12 billion euros worth of military equipment so far. In parallel, we will continue training Ukrainian soldiers like you are doing so, but you have been doing since 2015 already. And therefore, here too, our coordination with the Canadian mission and the EU military assistant mission in Ukraine and for Ukraine is excellent. Our goal is, on the European side, to train 30,000 troops by the end of the year. In addition, dear Justin, I very much welcome your intention to deliver generators to Ukraine, very much needed in these times where Putin is strategically destroying the energy infrastructure and civil infrastructure in Ukraine. And I also welcome that you're ready to join forces with us to support the demining in Ukraine. These are few examples, but it's all exemplary for the very strong alignment we have between Canada and the European Union. So, of course, it's not only for the present challenge that we are standing shoulder by shoulder, but also for the mid and long term. We will help Ukraine together to rebuild its beautiful country with the support that we gathered through our G7 donors platform. A second issue we discussed today is critical raw materials. They are the lifeblood of the clean economy. We need them to reach our ambitious decarbonization objectives. This is why, of course, the European Union's focus is very strong on the resilience of our supply chains. But we see today that, for example, China produces 98% of Europe's supplies of rare earth. And Europe needs to de-risk this dependency. And this, of course, is immediately the reason why Europe seeks to work together with trusted partners. And trusted partners is first and foremost Canada, the only country actually in the Northern Hemisphere with all the raw materials needed to produce lithium-ion batteries. You have a vast experience on mining and processing, and we know, and that is important in combination, we know the importance that you attach to labor rights, to environmental protection, and to the respect for local communities. We have started a partnership on critical raw materials in 2021. It is already bearing fruit. Now it's time to take it to the next level. Let's build on the excellent cooperation between us and our companies. For example, the Swedish Northvolt partnering with Vale Canada to ramp up supplies of low-carbon nickel used to manufacture electric vehicles. Another typical example is the Belgian Umicore that is planning to build a battery materials production plant right here in Ontario. So we will step up work with our respective industries. There is already a whole pipeline of very promising projects in exploration, mining, and processing. We will support our businesses in matchmaking. We will identify good investment opportunities, and we will also boost and accelerate the joint research that we are doing. Finally, last but certainly not least, we discussed our cooperation on climate change. We are in a very strong position to lead the way globally, and together we can rally the international community behind net zero by 2050. You mentioned the opportunity to have a memorandum of understanding on hydrogen. Another key to the successful transition is carbon pricing. So I'm very happy to work for the European Union to join your global carbon pricing challenge. And finally, we want to create as an overarching topic, as an umbrella basically, a green alliance between the European Union and Canada. It's to create good and well-paying jobs, to promote growth, to boost our energy and climate cooperation across the board. And yes, one shining example for that, how well, once in place, an agreement works, is CETA. I've just looked up the latest figure. So the increase of trade between us is by now in 2022 66%. So quite a step forward. Voilà, cher Justin, quelques mots pour décrire les opportunités qui s'offrent à nous. Deux partenaires historiques, deux amis rapprochés plus encore par des circonstances extraordinaires. Merci pour cette visite aussi utile qu'agréable.
Merci, Ursula.
Madame la Présidente, et merci, Premier ministre. Nous avons 20 minutes pour les questions des médias. We have 20 minutes for questions from media. Et on va commencer avec Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Question qui a trait à l'ingérence chinoise pour commencer. M. Poilievre vous accuse de vous en remettre à un processus secret et contrôlé. Ma question, quand vient le temps de nommer le rapporteur spécial, comment vous allez procéder en consultant les partis d'opposition et les chefs d'opposition? S'il y en a un qui s'oppose, par exemple, est-ce que vous allez aller de l'avant quand même? Est-ce que vous cherchez un consensus?
Tout d'abord, nous avons deux buts par rapport à l'ingérence chinoise dans notre démocratie. D'abord, c'est de s'assurer que le Canada a tous les moyens, les mécanismes, les outils pour contrer cette ingérence étrangère dans notre démocratie, dans nos élections, qu'on a tous les processus nécessaires pour le faire et que, deuxièmement, les Canadiens soient rassurés qu'on est en train d'utiliser ces processus et qu'ils sachent que notre démocratie demeure intègre et nos élections aussi. Pour ce faire, on a choisi d'utiliser les outils qu'on a, les outils qui sont établis depuis plusieurs années, mais aussi de nommer un rapporteur spécial indépendant qui va chapeauter ce travail, s'assurer que tout est en train d'être fait de la bonne façon et surtout rassurer les Canadiens. Alors, le choix de ce rapporteur spécial, évidemment, va être extrêmement important. Nous sommes ouverts à toute suggestion que les partis d'opposition vont nous partager en termes de noms qualifiés, et éminents et indépendants qui pourraient aller de l'avant. Et nous allons nous assurer que la personne choisie soit la bonne personne, non seulement pour évaluer le travail qui est en train de faire et qui doit encore être fait, mais aussi pour donner confiance aux Canadiens que ça va être fait de façon indépendante et rigoureuse.
Peut-être en anglais là-dessus, s'il vous plaît.
Okay. I think we have to keep in mind two clear objectives when it comes to foreign interference, particularly these days Chinese interference into our democracy. The first one is to make sure that the tools, the processes, the bodies we have within our government and our democracy are able to do everything necessary to protect our democracy, to protect our institutions and our elections from foreign interference. The second goal, related but distinct, is to make sure that Canadians have confidence that all those tools are being used and that we are continuing to see free, fair, protected elections despite attempts by foreign governments to interfere. As we move forward on those two goals of making sure we have the proper tools and giving confidence to Canadians, we will, of course, be open to suggestions that the various parties put forward for names for this independent special rapporteur, and we will ensure that whoever is chosen is someone who both has the capacity to ensure that we're doing all the right things to fight interference and has the capacity to give all Canadians confidence in the openness, transparency, and rigor of that process.
Madame la Présidente, j'aimerais vous entendre sur l'aide à l'Ukraine. Est-ce que, en fait, je voudrais savoir comment le Canada pourrait en faire plus en termes d'armement. Est-ce que, par exemple, le Canada pourrait fournir d'une part plus de munitions et éventuellement des avions de chasse?
So I see that Canada is doing much more than its fair share already compared to others, and is going way beyond what is necessary. So I want to thank Canada for that. Indeed, it's not only the military equipment. I know the intensive work on doing work with the defense industry to scale up ammunition, for example, standardized ammunition in Canada, the 155 millimeter ammunition badly needed in Ukraine. I'm very grateful that you're working on that because every day counts right now. But we know also that Canada, from the very beginning on, has been a staunch supporter what the budget support is concerned. I mentioned the support for the Ukrainian refugees, the training of Ukrainian forces that Canada started way earlier than other countries in 2015, the Operation Unifier, has had its success immediately at the beginning of the Russian invasion in Ukraine because the Ukrainian troops were much better trained than it was in 2014 the case. So it's also thanks to this support from Canada that Ukraine at the very beginning of this war was immediately able to resist this invasion. So I want to thank you for a support that goes way beyond what is the average.
Next question.
Hi there. My question is also for the European Commissioner President. Europe is trying to move away from Russian energy, but there are limited options. Canada, for example, doesn't exactly have the capacity when it comes to export, especially when it comes to natural gas. Are you disappointed in the position that Europe finds itself right now? And is it even possible for Europe to completely isolate Russia when it comes to oil and gas?
It is an extraordinary journey that we have undertaken during the last year. There was a big over-dependency at the beginning of the Russian invasion in Ukraine of Europe's energy needs and over-dependency on Russian fossil fuels. We have gotten rid of Russian coal. We have basically gotten rid of Russian oil. And Russia itself cut 80% of its gas supplies. We were the biggest client of Russia. Russia cut 80% of its gas supplies in only 8 months. Because energy supply globally was tightening. What have we done? We have immediately diversified away from Russia to like-minded, trusted partners. Most and foremost, the United States with LNG, but by increasing its LNG production, we do not have the necessary infrastructure to link Canada directly with the European Union. But the increased production of LNG here in Canada helped the global market to supply enough LNG to those who needed it, for example, the European Union. Second element, we saved energy. The Europeans saved 20% of their energy consumption during the last year. The third element is the most important. We massively invested in renewable energy because this is not only good for the climate, but it's also good for our independence and it creates jobs at home. And here, I must say, last year, for the very first time, we produced more electricity from wind and solar than from gas. And overall, if you look at the figures of last year, we were even able to reduce the CO2 emissions by 2.5%. So it was a very difficult journey, but in the very end, thanks to our friends and partners, we were able to come out stronger than we started last year.
Thank you very much. And my follow-up is to the Prime Minister on a similar question. Today, Pierre Poilievre accused you of helping to fund foreign dictators by shutting out Canada's natural gas industry. Given demand from European leaders, why does it appear that there's a bit of a hesitation on the part of your government to expand to meet this growing demand?
There is no hesitation. We will continue to work very hard to be there for our European partners now and long into the future. Canada continues to export natural gas and oil to the world, including through investments that this government oversaw in the largest private sector investment in Canada's history with LNG Canada on the West Coast. As that moves forward, we continue to develop Canada's importance as a source of energy. But we know that the world is changing, and that even as Europe is facing significant needs that we're happy to work with them to respond to and that we're encouraging our companies to look at, we know that the transformation of our energy mix towards lower carbon and renewables is going to be essential, which is why Canada can position itself to be a supplier, a reliable supplier of energy in a net zero world. And the innovation and the leadership that's going on in our energy sector right now, including by extraordinary energy workers in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland, who are in the traditional energy sectors, are leading the charge in decarbonization of our traditional sources while they're investing in innovation and growth in renewables. We are there to support trusted partners as the world is discovering that Russia and other authoritarian states are not trusted partners upon which to build strong economic growth for our citizens or for our countries. That's why Canada is so pleased to be working so closely with the European Union and other partners as we ensure that we're meeting energy needs now and long into the future as we approach net zero.
Next question.
Okay. Nous allons toujours être là pour nos partenaires. Et on voit très clairement que l'Europe a besoin d'appui maintenant. C'est pour ça qu'on a augmenté notre production de gaz naturel pour ajouter aux marchés internationaux, pour pouvoir libérer de l'espace ou des produits ou des ressources pour l'Union européenne. Mais en même temps, nous savons à quel point c'est important non seulement d'enlever la dépendance de l'Europe et des autres sur le gaz et l'essence russe, mais il faut qu'on réduise notre dépendance sur les carburants fossiles. C'est pour ça que ce que le Canada est en train de faire, investir dans des énergies renouvelables, dans la décarbonisation de nos sources d'énergie traditionnelles et le travail et l'innovation qui est en train de se faire dans notre secteur énergétique est tellement important, non seulement pour les Européens, mais pour tous nos partenaires à travers le monde qui commencent à comprendre qu'on ne peut pas compter sur des pays autoritaires comme la Russie et d'autres d'être des fournisseurs de biens et de ressources essentielles pour notre croissance économique et le bien-être de nos citoyens.
Returning to the issue of foreign interference in democratic institutions, which I know is an issue on both sides of the Atlantic in different contexts. Prime Minister, today the opposition leader accused you of working against Canada's interests, failing to act because the Liberal Party stood to benefit. How do leaders in Western democracies that are currently in power act without looking like they're just being defensive in their own self-interest?
I think one of the important things that citizens in democracies around the world have understood is how important it is to support our institutions, whether it's institutions like Elections Canada or an independent judiciary or an independent expert public service that continues to do the work of supporting Canadians and delivering services for citizens regardless of the political party that's in power. The impact and the threat of foreign interference we've seen in all sorts of different elections around the world. And it is upon all of us as leaders to ensure that even as we are strengthening our capacity as democracies and as institutions to respond to that, that we're not falling into the trap of actually weakening Canadians' confidence in those institutions by leaning in heavily on partisan accusations. I understand that this is a difficult and a very concerning issue for Canadians that are rightly asking all sorts of questions, which is why the government has chosen to move forward on bringing an independent special rapporteur who will be charged with reassuring Canadians even as they strengthen our ability to respond to interference and lean in and highlight on the excellent work done by the institutions that we've built up to protect from foreign interference. And I will again highlight that Mr. Poilievre has long been opposed to the idea of a National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians. When he was part of Stephen Harper's government, they were directly and aggressively opposed to the idea of swearing in, of getting top secret security clearances to opposition MPs so that a committee of parliamentarians with the appropriate clearances from all parties could lean in deeply and thoroughly into the actions that our intelligence community is taking or not taking to keep Canadians safe. This was something that the Conservative Party long opposed, and it's something that Mr. Poilievre, despite excellent work done over the past many years by Conservative members on the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, Mr. Poilievre continues to misrepresent and attack this important oversight body that was modeled on what democracies around the world do to keep their citizens safe, and indeed is a committee that regularly puts out public reports to Parliament on extremely delicate issues that they have dug into deeply. We have strong institutions, and responsible leadership is about supporting those institutions even as one finds points of disagreement with other political parties.
Madam President, am I to take from your remarks today that Europe has, in effect, given up on the idea of getting LNG directly from Canada in favor of the other approaches that you described there, where Canadian LNG goes south and you focus now on renewables exports? if you haven't given up on the idea, what instead would it take? Hear from both of you on that.
So what I said is that in the acute crisis in 2022, the infrastructure was not in place. What comes in the future is up to the business sector to also see the opportunities. And of course, there will be additional LNG infrastructure in the European Union because we need some LNG in different areas of the European Union, and this infrastructure is being built. But there's a very clear understanding, common understanding in the European Union that in the mid and long term, we need the bridge to the renewables. And we have in the European Union agreed on climate goals. We have cast them in law. We have a very clear roadmap how to get there. And this includes, for example, the development of hydrogen. Canada is one of the prime potential partner for hydrogen. And this is the reason why we're working on a memorandum of understanding for hydrogen, because we cannot only solve the crisis right now, what we did successfully in the last 12 months, but we also have to pave the path to the future, and our future will be renewables. There will be a baseload, certainly nuclear or gas, but the vast majority of energy will be renewables. And hydrogen, the European Union is planning on producing on its own 10 million tons of hydrogen by 2030, but also importing 10 million tons of hydrogen by 2030. So, and this is something where this is a lot, what we need, where we really need to work with trusted partner and start now the cooperation.
And if I could just add, let's be very clear, the $40 billion LNG Canada project on the West Coast to export LNG and displace coal in Asia was not a government project. It was a consortium led by Shell of international companies that saw a business case in doing exactly that, and we fully supported them in their ability to do that, but it was a commercial project. Similarly, there are companies looking into the viability and the value of exporting LNG off the East Coast, and they are making their decisions on market expectations and commercial principles. We as a government will, of course, be there to support and facilitate it if there's a company interested and invested, but it's not a government project that's going to do that. It's private companies, just like it's private companies in Germany and in Europe that are receiving and putting orders for LNG from Canada.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Taria Isra with Global News. When it comes to the investigation into election interference, you said you want it to be nonpartisan, but when election interference reports initially surfaced, you suggested it was racist to raise these concerns. But several Chinese-Canadian leaders have said that was reductive and that you ignored their warnings about interference. So do you have anything to say to Chinese Canadians who may feel ignored, and do you take responsibility for politicizing this issue?
On the contrary, I have heard regularly from Chinese Canadians who are pointing out that the first targets of foreign interference from China are always Chinese Canadians. That it is diaspora communities themselves that, far from being, as some have chosen to suggest, perpetrators of foreign interference, are actually targets of foreign interference. And I think it's extremely important for us to understand that standing up for all Canadians includes standing up for Canadians who can trace their roots to different countries around the world, whether it's China or Iran or Russia, who are themselves the primary targets of interference. And I think that's something that often gets overlooked in the discussions around foreign interference.
Final question?
And just on the special rapporteur, can we get a little bit more specific on the mandate? Is it to investigate allegations of meddling, or whether your government knew about these allegations and did not act?
As we said a number of times, the special rapporteur will be there to ensure that Canada has all the mechanisms and tools necessary and is making best use of them to counter foreign interference, and to reassure Canadians that we are doing exactly that. This is key to the work that the Special Rapporteur will do in an independent and rigorous way. But part of one of the things we learned from Commissioner Rouleau's response around the Public Order Emergency Commission was working with the Special Rapporteur to establish the right terms of reference and mandate for them to achieve those two goals of making sure we have the right systems and reassuring Canadians that everything necessary to be done has been and will be done. Involving them is really important.
Thank you. That will conclude today's press conference. Merci. Ça va mettre fin à la conférence presse.
Merci tout le monde. There we go. Let's go.